All right. So last time we had that scene, Jacob having run away from his brother um, and found himself in the wilderness, has this dream of the angels going from heaven to earth. He awakens, he's blown away by this scene. He says, Ma Norah Hamakom Hazeh. How awesome is this place? It's none other than the gate of heaven. Um, and then he turns to God, who has promised him protection, and strikes a deal. Um, and God says, "I'll be with you and I'll protect you." Jacob wants to be very specific. Well, if you will be with you, and if you will give me food and clothing, and return me safely to my father's house, then I, on my part, will build you a temple, and I'll give you 10%, and you will be my God, which is really remarkable statement. Um, First of all, because what does that mean if God doesn't do it? Conditional Jacob does not seem at this moment to be a person of faith. It's much more transactional. You give for me, and then I'll accept you as my God. It should be noted that there is something transactional about the relationship between God and Israel with the Exodus, because again and again, God says, I did this for you. I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt, the land of bondage, to be your God. Therefore, I did for you. Now you must do for me. But it's not really quite the same thing, obviously. At any rate, Jacob now goes on his way, having made this agreement. And we're going to pick up, we're in chapter 28, 29, actually, right at the beginning of chapter 29, which in the Eitz Chaim is on page 169. 169. So Jacob resumes his journey and comes to the land of the Easterners, simply B'nai Kedem, the place where people dwell in the east. And there before his eyes, he looks and hine. Um, I think Robert Alter does this very well. He looked and behold, he's like, you get a sense that, there is a well, there is a well in the field, and there are three flocks, and they are waiting there um, because the flocks were watered from the well. So the scene is that there's a well and there are these flocks, but no one is doing anything. When all the flocks were gathered, the stone would be rolled from the mouth of the well and the sheep watered, and then the stone would be put back in its place. So they're waiting for the stone to be removed. Um, so one purpose of the stone, of course, is to protect the water, make sure that nothing befouls it. But there is another suggestion here, and that is that you had to pay for the water. That really this was a way of controlling. So people would come for the flocks and to make sure that they were among those who were entitled to the water. Meanwhile, Jacob says to them, we don't know quite who, but there hasn't been a mention of what, one assumes that he's talking to those who are with the flocks. And he says, where are you from? And they say, we are from Haran, which Jacob knows is where his family is, and therefore he's in the right place. And he says, do you know Lavan, the son of Nahor? Right? his mother's brother? And they say, yes, right? And he says, is he well? And they say, yes. And there is Rachel, his daughter, coming to water the flock. So, so Jacob then says, it's still broad daylight, too early to round up the animals, water the flock, and take them to pasture. But they said, so Jacob is saying, why are you all sitting around? Right? It's daylight. You're losing valuable pasture time. Presumably, they should water the flocks later, after they've had the opportunity to be pastured. And they say, we cannot, right, until all the flocks are gathered. And then the stone is rolled away off the mouth of the well, and we order the ship. So we have no choice. We're wasting our time here, but what can we do? And while he is still speaking with them, Rachel comes with her father's flock. She was a shepherdess. The fact that it mentions that she was a shepherdess suggests perhaps that women were not generally among those who watched sheep. Rachel itself, her name means a female sheep. So she's very much tied to this occupation. And then we get this great statement. When Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his uncle Laban, and the flock of his uncle Laban, he went up, rolled the stone off the mouth of the well, and watered the flock of his uncle. So he knows that they're not supposed to do this. He's been told that's not the local custom. Perhaps more flocks are coming. He has no idea. And one assumes that the stone is extremely heavy. It's not something that someone could certainly do alone. And so we have the sense almost of superhuman strength that Jacob possesses, perhaps because he's under divine protection, perhaps because seeing Rachel gives him a huge burst of adrenaline. At any rate, he goes and he rolls the stone off and he waters the flock. So this immediately sends us back to the scene where Abraham's servant has gone to find a wife for Isaac, that wife being ultimately Jacob's mother. And there, it was also a scene at the well. Presumably, this is where you find people, though there one has a sense that Rebecca's job was to get water for the family. There are no sheep there. We don't have a sense of that. Women would come out, and that was typical in antiquity, that women were the ones who drew the water. And the extraordinary thing is that she then, of course, as you remember, waters the camels as well. Here, it's Jacob who does the watering. So similar scene, but reversed. He's the one, and presumably it was Rachel's job to dig out the water, but he does it, and he kisses her and breaks into tears. And as we're going to see, this is love at first sight. This is exactly the opposite of an arranged marriage, right? And the Hebrew actually is quite striking. It says, by Yisak Yaakov, he watered. I'm sorry, got to go back a verse. Right, Vayask et hatzon, he watered the flock, and then V'yisak Yaakov l'Rachel, and he kissed her. And if you look, it's the same verb. It's in a different form. With the shoresh, the three-letter root is exactly the same, right? So it seems to be one large action. He waters, he kisses. There's a sense of real force behind it. Now, why does he start to cry? I think there is a sense here. He's made it. He's home. He didn't know that he would be able to get there, and having wandered in the wilderness. But there's also a sense that he is overwhelmed by emotion, and so he kisses her. You can't read this through the eyes of the Me Too movement. This is not unwanted affection. At least she doesn't seem to respond in that way. And then Jacob tells her that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son, and she runs to tell her father. Similar to the scene with Rebekah, who also runs to the household. On hearing the news of his sister's son Jacob, Laban runs out to greet him. He embraces him, he kisses him, he takes him into his house. So the rabbis and Rashi in particular reflecting that does not see Laban's response to Jacob here as a pure act of affection for a kinsman. And points out that Laban was not, he showed himself in the episode with Rebekah to be quite greedy and impressed with what seems to have struck him was the wealth that Abraham's servant brought, as well as the jewelry that Abraham's servant had given to Rebekah. So here, what's going on? And in a rather crude statement, Rashi says that he kisses Jacob to feel around in his mouth to see if there are any jewels hidden there. There must be some wealth, right? This is a rich family. And he doesn't realize, of course, that Jacob has fled with nothing. He has absolutely nothing. And Jacob tells Laban all that has happened. Now, not clear what that means. He tells him all that has happened, and Laban says, "You are truly my bone and my flesh." So the question is, did Jacob simply tell him that he left his father's house, returning to Haran to find a wife, which would be the simplest story? Or does he, bare his heart and tell him the whole story? Tell him the story of how he deceived his brother and his father. And it may be that he tells him the whole story. And I have a couple of reasons to think that. One is because, remember, Rebekah was the one who put him up to it. That's Laban's sister. So it wouldn't be so bad to tell him about this, right? And to explain to him actually that Rebekah sent him to Laban's house to get away from Esau and to find a wife. So that's one thing. And then we're going to see what happens with the marriage with Rachel. And there too, when Laban explains himself, we really do get a sense Laban knows something. The Midrash here says, when Laban says, "You are my bone of my bone," right? You truly, you are truly the bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. According to the Midrash, what he's saying is, "Oh, you're a deceiver like me. You're the one who tricked your father, and we have a foreshadowing. I'm gonna deceive you as well. Okay, I'm gonna stop here just briefly before we move on with the story. And any comments or questions before we do anything at all? Yes, so
Even though you said before that Rachel was not there to tend to the sheep, but it still says her title, Roah.
yeah.
She's a shepherd.
No, no, no. I said she's a shepherdess for sure, which was un un she's a shepherdess, which means effectively that she was there to tend to the sheep. I don't think there's any question about that. What I said was, and presumably she would be the one to water the sheep, right? But she doesn't. Jacob does. That was my point. Um, but no, she's clearly there. She's watching. That's her job. Unlike Rebecca's job, whose her role seems to have been to draw water for the household, and then she goes out of her way actually to water the cows. Anything else? Okay, so let's get on with it. Um, so Jacob had been there for Chodesh Yamim, for a month's time. Uh, V'yomer Lavan says to Jacob, just because you are my kinsman, should you serve me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. Um, there's a sense here, perhaps, that he's been working for him. I mean, you could read this two ways. Either Lavan says, time you went to work, you've been here for a month, or Jacob's been working for him. And, because what's he doing? Sitting around the tent all day? He's out with the sheep. And now Lavan says to him, why should you serve me for nothing? Tell me what your wages will be. And now we have a little uh, paragraph, a few lines, which sort of take us out of the action. We have a little suspense. What is he going to say? And we're told Lavan had two daughters. The name of the older one was Leah. The name of the younger one was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, and Rachel was gorgeous. So it's really unclear what the Ene Rachel Rakot. Rach means soft. She had soft eyes. Does this mean that there's something, not quite right about her eyes, that when you look at her, you know, another suggestion was made that actually it means she had nice eyes, that they were pretty. But why do you say she had nice eyes as opposed to Rachel, who is gorgeous, right? Well, if you want to say something nice about Rachel, about Leah, she had nice eyes. It's almost damning with false praise. Uh, 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 right. Okay. So, and then we get Yehav Yaakov et Rachel, and Jacob was in love with Rachel. So he says, I will serve you for 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. So this seems to be a reference to the mohar. This is the bride price that needs to be paid for marriage, usually would be paid by the father of the groom, but Jacob's father is not there, and Jacob has nothing. So he's saying, in effect, my labor for 7 years will pay the price. And Laban says, and notice what Jacob says, because Jacob's always very precise when he makes a deal. He says, there's 7 years, that's the price. And why? for your younger daughter, Rachel, right? So there's no ambiguity at all in what Jacob is saying. This is the terms. This is what I get in return. This is the work I do. But now look at what Laban said. Better I give her to you than to some outsider. There's nothing specific. And it doesn't, if you look at it, he's not agreeing. He doesn't say, I'll give her to you. He says, well, it would be better to give her to you than to some outsider. Stay with me. Okay, so there is a sense here that they have made a bargain. And it's interesting, by the way, that in the blessings, there was all this talk about the younger serving, the older serving the younger. But here throughout the story, it's going to be Jacob who is the servant, as he's serving in order to acquire his wife. So he serves for 7 years, and they seem to him but a few days because of his love for her. This is actually quite a strange statement, to me anyway, because you expect him to be counting the days, right? Ah, 7 years. All right, a little. Now it's 6 years and 11 months, and so on. I mean, it's got to. But the Torah here wants to tell us that I think it wasn't so much the passage of time as the price he's paying. That the price he's paying seems like nothing because of his love for her. At any rate, we quickly jump in time, and Jacob says to Lavan, Hava et ishti, give me my wife, my time is fulfilled, that I may cohabit with her. It's time. She's presumably been his intended throughout all this period, but now he says, I want to consummate. So Laban gathers all the people of the place and he makes a feast. And when evening came, he took his daughter Leah, brought her to him. He cohabited with her. Now, again, this is very dramatic. We're going to have an aside. Laban had given his maidservant Zilpah to his daughter Leah as her maid. Why are we given this information? We don't need it. We don't need it here. But the text is creating dramatic suspense. He goes in, and then in the morning, when morning came, it is Leah, right? The sense is, he didn't see her. He didn't see who it was the night before. Was she veiled? Not clear that women wore veils. Was it just too dark? Even though it said it was evening when he was in the tent, was it hard to see? One way or another, he doesn't recognize her. He sleeps with her, which is irrevocable now. And he has made her his wife. And he turns to Lavan and he says, what have you done to me? Right? What is this thing you've done to me? I was working for Rachel. Why did you deceive me? And the word deceive here is exactly the same word that's used when Jacob deceives his father, pretending to be Esau. And Laban says, we don't do that here. It's not our practice not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the. And here we have midah keveged midah, payback. This is exactly what Jacob managed to do. And he deceived his father and put the younger before the older. And now Jacob has been deceived. And the older is put before the younger. He says, well, wait out the bridal week of this one, and we will give you that one too. And you'll serve me for another 7 years. So Jacob, perhaps Lavan understands that he can't actually keep Jacob waiting for 14 years. So he says, okay, finish the celebration of this one, and then you can take the other one, but you'll have to pay the bride price for her too. So two things here. One is that this idea of a week-long wedding seems to have been typical in antiquity, and it continues in some communities to this day. That we have a process called Sheva Brachot, Sheva Brachas, for a week after a couple's married, there are parties and gatherings where in various people's houses, the only requirement is that somebody has to be there who wasn't at the wedding. So there are what's called in halacha a new face. And if there's a new face there, then you can do the whole thing and you say the 7 blessings as part of the grace after meals that were said under the chuppah. So it's a continuation of the wedding. I think it's actually, unfortunately, it isn't done that much except in certain Orthodox circles. But it's really, I think it's quite a nice thing. And if you think about it, it parallels the idea of Shiva as well. You know, we mourn for 7 days. Why wouldn't we celebrate for 7 days as well? So here we have a sense of that, and Jacob then does so. He waits out this week, and then he marries Rachel. And now we're told Rachel also has a maid. Her name is Bilhah. So it's important to note, why are we even told about these maids? It apparently was customary in antiquity that a woman would go with her maid. That was part of what the father would give the groom or give his daughter when she was married. But it's also important because they're going to figure later on in the story. So we need to introduce them. And he now he cohabits with Rachel, and there's sort of a poignancy. V'yavo gam, also Rachel. Rachel was the love of his heart, but now she's also Rachel, and he serves for another 7 years. So we've seen now Jacob paid back for what he did, and married to 2 women. According to the Torah, of course, you're not allowed to do this. The book of Leviticus is very specific. You can't, not that you can't marry 2 women. In biblical times, people could, and even in the book of Leviticus, it seems clear. And we also have legislation that says if you have 2 wives and one is beloved and one is hated, you can't overlook the child if the child of the second, the hated wife is the firstborn child, then of the father, then even though he is the son of the hated wife, he still becomes the firstborn, and he has all the privileges of the firstborn. But this is, of course, before Sinai. You don't have to worry about that. And it just didn't seem to be. And this whole idea of marrying into the family, we see here clearly as a positive thing, keeping things within the tribe. Okay, one more quick break. Anything here, Sandy?
Excuse me. A few quick things. One is what you just said about Leviticus. I think, is there also something that says you can't marry 2 sisters?
Yes, that's what I said.
Oh, okay. I missed that. Okay, the other is it reminded me about Leah's eyes being weak, about saying something nice about Hillel and Shammai. that, the nice
Yeah, it's very
shoe.
much, yes. It's
Yeah.
exactly like that Shammai says you can't lie. Just essentially you'll have to find something you can say that's positive, right? So here, this is very much a Shammai comment, if indeed that's what it intends, rather than some, either she is not beautiful compared to her sister, but she has nice eyes, or maybe she is attractive, but the eyes are some sort of blemish, one way or the other. She's harder to marry off.
And one other thing, I'm puzzled by why Jacob would say 7 years. I mean, Laban asked him, he could say anything. He could have said 1 year. He could have said, right? Why did he pick 7 years?
Okay, I mean, first of all, it's a nice round number, right? But I take your point. I mean, we can only assume that we know what the bride price is. He's valuing his labor. He's perhaps even demonstrating how much he loves her. In some ways it's like buying the most beautiful ring you could buy. It's a statement. And what Lavan says, after all, could be with Jacob. Question is this, really: does Jacob want to negotiate, or does he want it done? Right? This reminds me a little bit of Abraham buying the cave of the Machpelah. He offers a price which is in some ways exorbitant, but he doesn't want to negotiate. He wants the deal to be made. And presumably also this negotiation kind of cheapens it, right? I mean, Rachel's standing there and, Jacob says, I'll work 3 years. And Lavan says, no, I need 8 years. And it goes, I could see why. And as I said before, also seven is a recurring number. It's a
I know.
complete number.
Thank you.
And
Pull the covers off the stuff on the porch.
immediately Yvonne seizes on it.
Report for the next month.
Clearly a significant amount of time.
Looks like spring. Yeah, so when you come back, will you please open the sink?
Okay. It's clearly a significant amount of time, and that's the deal. Okay. Okay, I'm muting everybody here. Okay, so anything else? Saul, did you have something? No. Okay. All right. So we're going to go on, and we're going to see that things do not work out well for Rachel. God hears that Leah is unloved, or sees actually, and therefore God opens her womb. So the idea is that she otherwise would have been infertile, perhaps. In other words, this is not a natural thing. This is a blessing. And she conceives and bears a son that she names Ruvain, which means God has seen, right? From Roeh, God has seen my affliction, and my husband will love me now. And there's such pathos here, right? I mean, she's hoping something. Now she's had a son, perhaps that'll do it. And she conceives again and bears a son and declares, this is because God had heard that I was unloved and given me this also. And she names him Shimon. And she conceives and bears a son and declares, this time my husband will become attached to me, for I have given him 3 sons. Therefore she named him Levi. And she conceived again and born a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. And so she named him Yehudah. All right, so we get a sense here that she's at least taking satisfaction from her children. She hasn't achieved her husband's affections, but now she has all these kids. She's got 4 sons at this point, and we're going to see that she still will be hoping for his affection. Meanwhile, Rachel saw that she had borne Jacob no children, and she becomes envious of her sister. And she says to Jacob, "Give me children or I will die." Right, this very hyperbolic language, reminding us back to the kinds of things that Rebecca had said, actually the kind of thing that Esau had said when he came in from the field, and he said he was on the verge of death if Jacob did not give him the stew that he was cooking. And Jacob gets angry at Rachel, which is, the woman that he loves. And I think you can see in this anger Jacob's frustration that she has not borne him a child. And he says, "Can I take the place of God who denied you the fruit of the womb?" Right? This is not. If I was a marriage counselor, boy, I'd have words for Jacob. This is really insensitive. It reminds us, of course, of the story of the birth of Samuel. And we have their two wives. Remember, Peninnah, who is the one who is able to bear children, and then the woman who ultimately becomes Samuel's mother, who is barren, and this rivalry which develops between them, and ultimately it gets resolved, but we have this sense here of a foreshadowing almost. And so what happens, and we know about this pattern from Abraham, she says, "Here is my maid Bilhah, consort with her. She may bear on my knees, and through her I too will have children." So it's not working, just as it wasn't working for Sarah. Sarah then goes ahead and gives Abraham her maid Hagar, and indeed here too, he cohabits with her. She conceives and bears a son. And Rachel says, "God has vindicated me. He has heeded my plea and given me a son." So she names him Dan. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceives again and bears a second son. And Rachel says, "A faithful contest I wage with my sister. Yes, I have prevailed." So she named him Naphtali. So we get this strong rivalry between the women. Jacob now has 6 children, but none that are actually born from Leah herself. So Leah saw that when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a concubine. You really see this back and forth between the women, right? It is a contest. So she gives Zilpah to Jacob, and when Leah's maid Zilpah bears Jacob a son, Leah says, "What luck!" She names him God. And Leah's maid Zilpah bears Jacob a second son, and she says, "What fortune! Women will deem me fortunate." And so she names him Asher. So Rachel has no natural children. Her maid has given her a couple, but Leah is still going strong. So now it comes to the wheat harvest, and Ruvain came upon some mandrakes in the field, brought them to Leah. And so mandrakes were believed in antiquity to be a source of an aphrodisiac, source of fertility. So he finds them and he brings them to Leah. And Rachel says to Leah, "Give me some mandrakes." But she said to her, "Was it not enough for you to take away my husband, that you also want my son's mandrakes?" Right? Why should I give you anything? And Rachel says, I promise he will lie with you tonight in return for your son's marriage. So presumably Jacob has stopped sleeping with Leah. There is a sense here that, he doesn't really want much to do with her. Jacob comes home from the field. Leah goes out to meet with him, and she says to him, Kitsa, I have surely, I've surely purchased you with the mandrakes of my son. Right. So this is again, we're always in this kind of Jacob's in these financial situations, these deals that are being made. But now Rachel and Leah were the ones that he bought with his labor. And now she has purchased the right to a night in Jacob's bed, and Jacob goes along. And God heeds Leah, and she conceives and bears a fifth son. And Leah says, God has given me my reward for having given my maid to my husband. She names him Issachar. She conceives again and bears Leah a sixth son. And Leah says, God has given me a choice gift. This time my husband will exalt me. So she names him Zvulun. So it does not seem it's worked for her, but Rachel is still out in the cold. And now finally, God remembers Rachel, right? And again, this constant theme in Genesis of the barren woman who is remembered. God opens her womb. She conceives and bears a son, saying, God has taken away my disgrace. And she named him Yosef, which is to say, may God add another son for me. So she's hoping, but at least she's got one. And we're going to stop here for a moment. We've looked at these various fertility scenes. Oops. Anything at all about any of this, about these fierce rivalry between these women? Yeah, go ahead, Sandy.
I would say Jacob has a good deal going.
Yeah, well, he certainly got a lot of kids, but his household is very unsettled. I mean, and finally, at least his beloved wife has a child. Anything else? Okay, yeah, so.
The word Yisachar, why don't we say Yisachar? I mean, there's an extra shin in there that is silent. I never understood that.
I never even thought about it. Yeah, Yisachar. Huh. I do not know. Let me just look at one thing. Yeah, I'm looking forward to Jacob's blessing of his children, and there too, Yisachar.
Yeah.
I do not know. I don't. It's actually very odd. Let me just see if there's anything. All right, I don't know that I'll be able to find out, but I will look into it.
One more thing.
Yeah.
When they mention Dinah, they don't say anything about there's no commentary on why they call her Dinah.
Right. It's true. It's not, it may be because she is not going to become one of the, she's not going to become the head of one of the tribes. It's possible. It's possible because she's a woman. It's not, it's striking actually that Dinah gets mentioned at all, right? It just wasn't generally women's birth, the birth of daughters is not something that's taken note of. Here, I think it is because we're going to have a whole story which involves her. And so it's necessary, but she's not getting all that much. Dina does have to do with judgment. Right? There's already been a Don. More than that, I don't know. It's a good question also. Sandy.
In verse 31, it says, and the Lord saw that Leah was hated. I read somewhere, and I don't know if it was this verse, that not really hated, but not loved as much. What does it say in the?
Okay, so the verb is strong. It is the word for hatred.
Oh,
Whether it's hard to know what the nuance is. And certainly other translations do not use such long language. Let me see. Just going through it. You said it was verse 31?
yes. It says here less loved.
Yeah.
It's actually sinua, means hated, and actually the hurt says hated.
Yeah, it definitely means hated.
But in the note, it says less loved.
Yeah.
See that? It's all the bottom of the page.
Let me just look at one thing.
Page 109, the note. The word here only means less loved.
Yeah. I want to see how Robert Alter translates it. I really like his translations.
Actually, there's a comment here in the Hertz. It says the word here, you're right. The word here only means less love. Not that Jacob had an aversion to her, but that he preferred Rachel.
Yes, except that the language.
You're right.
The language is, let me just see, we're in chapter 30.
Chapter 29.
Yeah, I'm looking, 29, 30. What, 29 what?
Verse 31.
31.
Chapter 29, verse 31.
Yeah. So the language here is really even stronger. Despised, if he has a note on it. Leah was despised. The Hebrew term for despised or hatred seems to have emotional implications, as Leah's words in verse 31 suggest. But it is also a technical legal term for the unfavored co-wife. The appearing and then he goes on to talk about Hannah and Penina. But so, okay. Despised, I think, is worse than hated in some, well, maybe not. Okay, let's go on. See what we can finish up. See how far we can get. Okay, so Jacob says in verse 25, once Rachel had Joseph, Jacob is ready to leave. He's been waiting for his son through his beloved wife, and he says to him, send me and I will go to my homeland. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go. For well you know what services I have rendered. And Laban says, doesn't want him to go. If you will indulge me, I have heard by divination, I've learned by divination, the Lord has blessed me on your account. Name the wages due for me, and I will pay you. So Laban just doesn't want him to leave. And Jacob says, but he said, you know well how I have served you, and your livestock has fared with me. For the little you had before I came has grown to much. And since the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned, and when shall I make provision for my own household? he says, yeah, I'm gonna serve you, but I'm not really building anything for me. And he says, what shall I pay you? And Jacob says, you don't have to pay me anything if you'll do this. I will pasture and keep your flocks. Let me pass through your whole flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted animal, every dark colored sheep, and every spotted and speckled goat. They will be my wages. And in the future, when you go over my wages, let my honesty towards you testify for me. If there are among my goats any that are not speckled or spotted, or sheep that are not dark colored, they got there by theft. And Laban says, okay. So these are not the generally is recognized that there are a lot fewer speckled goats and dark sheep. He's not asking for a great deal. And Laban is quick to agree. Then what does Jacob do? The same day he removed the streaked and spotted he-goats and all the speckled spotted she-goats and everyone that had white on it, and all the dark-covered sheep, and left them in charge of his sons. And he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Laban, while Jacob was pasturing the rest of Laban's flock. So he really separates them. He leaves them with his sons. And then Jacob does this very odd thing. He takes fresh shoots of poplar, almond, and plane. He peels white stripes in them, laying bare the white of the shoots. The rods that he had peeled, he stood up in front of the goats in the troughs and the water receptacles that the goats may drink from them. Their mating occurred when they came to drink. Since the goats mated by the rods, the goats brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted young. So there is a widespread view, and it continues through the time of the rabbis, that what a person sees or an animal sees at the moment of conception will in some sense determine the young. It's a very odd idea. I can show you Talmudic passages which seem to reflect this idea as well. So, I mean, there are those who claim that Jacob just actually, by the laws of genetics, over time, these are recessive genes, but over time, they will enable more animals to be developed with these characteristics. Jacob is going to go on to separate the strong from the weak, and that's also perhaps part of the breeding. But the text itself seems to make it pretty clear that this is what Jacob does. This is what affects the outcome. He never says he won't do it. He just knows something that Laban doesn't know. So, and he deals separately with the sheep. He made those animals face the streaked or wholly dark colored animals in Laban's flock, so that he produced special flocks for himself, which he did not put with Laban's flocks. Moreover, when the sturdier animals were mating, he would place the rods in the troughs in full view of the animals. So they mated by the rods, but when the feebler animals, he would not place them there. Thus the feeble animals went to Laban, the sturdy to Jacob. And so the man grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own flocks, maidservants, manservants, camels, and asses. And this is not going to be good, because we see in the next verse, beginning of 31, Jacob heard the things that Laban's sons were saying. They are saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from that which was our father's, he has built up wealth. And Jacob also saw that Laban's manner towards him was not as it had been in the past. And the Hebrew here is his face. His face is not as it had been in the past. And Jacob senses now things are not going to go well. He's gotten all of this wealth. It isn't what Laban had intended. It's creating jealousy among the sons of Laban. And as we'll see next time, it is finally time for Jacob to get out of town. And it's clear to him that Lavan is not going to let him go. And so he has to run away. We'll see that next time. Any final questions? Just hold on. Yes. Go ahead, Saul.
The first time that this appears, Hatahat Elohim Anochi,
Yes.
that appears several times later, especially I think in the story of Joseph and his,
Yes.
brothers, and of course,
Yeah.
with
No,
Pharaoh.
it's right. Joseph, when he talks about his ability to explain dreams. Right. Yeah, we do.
Dreams, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And thank you for that. Okay. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay. So we're going to pick up the story next time, and we will see Jacob running away. What happens when Jacob, I think also we'll get to what happens when Jacob and Esau meet once again, and the fateful story of Jacob wrestling with an angel, becoming Yisrael. He will finally take on the name, which will be the name of our people. So there's a lot to see next time. I hope to see you. And in the meantime, have a great week. Happy Purim. Remember, Thursday night and Friday is Purim. Go listen to the Megillah and enjoy. Take care, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.